My name is Abhay Bhargav, and I'm really happy to be doing this at the LISA21 USENIX conference. My topic for today is SkillOps, which is essentially going to be focusing on how we can build modern security and technology teams with better real world approaches to training. I'm going to be focusing on training, skilling up, and how we can leverage all of these potential possibilities to make our technology and security teams a whole lot better. My name is Abhay Bhargav. I'm the founder of We45 and our training organization, AppSec Engineer. I started off as a penetration tester, red teamer, mostly in offensive security. But over the last few years, my focus has largely been towards scaling application security, implementing DevOps and DevSecOps, mostly looking at how we can leverage automation and so on. In addition, I have also have a pretty large role as an educator. In fact, I've written most of our training programs that we deliver in places like Black Hat, DEF CON, OWASP events, as well as many other private events worldwide. I have essentially designed and started and leveraged curriculum on all of these different areas like cloud security, DevSecOps, AppSec, Kubernetes security, and so on. And I've essentially trained over 10,000 students over the last 12 years now. Aside from that, I'm also a contributor to several open source projects like Threat Playbook, which is a threat modeling as code project, as well as many other application security related projects that I constantly keep contributing to and I play an important part of. In addition, I generally also spread a lot of information on application security and other information security related topics on YouTube, as well as on my blog. Now, my agenda for this talk is going to be focused on skilling and training, right? Because that's been one of the big areas of my focus over the last 5 or 6 years. I've developed a lot of training programs and delivered a lot of hands on training for folks in different parts of the globe. And these are some of my anecdotes that I can bring to this talk as well. So, initially, I'm going to start off with the changing nature of the IT security job landscape itself, right? Now, things have changed from what IT security jobs used to be versus now. Things have undergone a massive change, especially with certain trends accelerating this change, right? And then we're going to be looking at this concept that I call skill ops. Now, skill ops essentially is about how we can leverage certain specific techniques to be able to bring about a much better quality of training that can make your people a whole lot better, and as well as making them a whole lot better, making them a whole lot more effective in their own careers as well. So not only does it help the organization, but it also helps the people who are part of this and who are, of course, may move on to other organizations over time, right? That's basically what I'm going to focus on, as well as, of course, we'll end with some conclusions. This is going to be the crux of my talk, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on throughout my talk. Now, if you look at 2020 and 2021, obviously there have been things that have changed our worldview considerably, specifically the pandemic and the outcome of that pandemic, right? So, most of us in 2019 were used to a certain way of doing things, but the pandemic has come and completely changed the way we approach things. Because, first, even the stodgiest companies that were not interested in letting people work from home had to adapt to the fact that, hey, we have to work from home. There's no real choice anymore. So this is something that we had to come to grips with. Now, working from home automatically brought its own set of challenges. I'm not going to delve too much into that, but it also brought with it certain challenges of training, right? Because training is such an important aspect of the human experience, especially within the organization. Training needs to adapt to a way where we adapt to uh, office scenarios or hybrid scenarios or work from home scenarios. Training needs to adapt, and that's something that I saw firsthand. My industry was completely disrupted by the pandemic, and I saw that the change that we needed to do was something that was very different from what we'd been doing till 2019 even, right? So that's something that I'm going to be talking about. Of course, the cloud has again become a massive change agent in 2020 and onwards, right? The pandemic saw the massive move to the cloud. Everybody wanted to get on the cloud. Even cloud projects that were already in place were funded a little bit more. They got a lot more. They got a lot more budget for these kind of projects, and the cloud started to grow quite extensively because of the pandemic. The pandemic literally, I would say that the pandemic specifically accelerated all these previous trends that were already there, and cloud adoption, cloud migration, and as a result, cloud security also became a pretty huge talking point in 2020 and 2021. And of course, the 2020 and 2021 saw, as always, the relentless march of security incidents. We saw security incidents affect companies large and small. We saw a massive rash of different types of security incidents, especially related to the pandemic, in the form of either phishing attempts or other type of social engineering attempts. The usual compromises that used to happen with hastily set up infrastructure, especially people migrating from environments that were typically on-prem to the cloud, also saw its own set of exploits. So this was kind of, I wouldn't say this was a new trend, but this just continued on point and probably exacerbated because of some of the aspects of the pandemic. So this is something that we have seen, and I think all of us can agree on that these are trends that we are likely to see continue as well. Even post 2021, the effects of the pandemic are likely to have a permanent effect. The way organizations work, the way they allow people to work from home or from hybrid locations or whatever it is, this is going to be the new normal. This is going to be the way we're going to proceed well into the future as well. Now, the numbers kind of support it as well, right? So, according to the ISC squared, this is the number of jobs going unfilled. This is over the course of 2020, based on a report from the ISC squared. 3.12 million. So, this is the talent shortage that we speak of in security, according to this particular survey, still exists and still exists aplenty. Now, of course, a lot of reasons can be attributed to poor training, and I'll talk about that as we go along. But definitely, this is a number that we can't ignore. There is a talent shortage, and that is something that we need to talk about and we need to address in a way that is inclusive, in a way that actually makes sense for people getting into this industry and actually staying in this industry. The other thing that we see is ISSA also reported a very similar sort of statistic. 70% of organizations are impacted by talent shortages. This is again a survey from 2020 where they've reported a similar kind of a happening with the ISC Square survey. The other thing that was reported from ISSA, this part of the same survey, was that hands-on security skills are required for professionals today. And this is something that can't be truer today, right? Today, we're dealing with extremely technical areas of focus, especially in organizations who are migrating to the cloud or running Kubernetes clusters or using containers or any of these technologies or running serverless stacks or what have you. Essentially, you need to do all of this in a hands-on way. You can't really have you can't really have a scenario where you're sitting 20,000 feet in the air and trying to manage these things. People need to have hands-on skills to run these things, to manage these things, to defend these things, to attack these things. These are very important. 52% of the respondents felt that hands-on education was extremely important for cybersecurity professionals today. And according to Forbes, 32% of IT budgets were on the cloud in 2020, right? This is, again, a number that is likely to only increase because cloud adoption kind of saw this massive uptick last year. And over time, cloud adoption is only going to see more and more adoption. And with cloud adoption, automatically come cloud security concerns. And that goes to my next number, which is cloud security failures. 99% of them will be attributed to customers, according to Gartner. Now, this is a staggering number. 99% is a extremely asymmetrical number, simply because according to a lot of shared responsibility or security shared responsibility between the cloud provider and the customer, you will see that a lot of these breaches typically that have happened have been attributed to customer misconfiguration or customer error, which is largely true as well. But you will see that over time that this number is not something what an organization can ignore. This is a pretty staggering number, and this number can have a pretty huge impact over your organization's security posture, since you are going to be moving to the cloud quite extensively over the course of either this year or the coming few years as well. And of course, the statistic that I'm sure a lot of you have seen in several conference talks, but I think is very relevant, especially for this talk, is the 100 is to 10 is to 1 statistic, right? For every 100 developers, you have 10 DevOps or Ops folks, and then, of course, you have one person in InfoSec. And I don't know what is the source of this statistic, but I think looking at the way InfoSec or cybersecurity teams are staffed, I would kind of agree with this number. It doesn't seem very apocryphal to me. The very fact that you have these kind of numbers is very real. So, before, when you look at cybersecurity professionals, especially in application security or dealing with application security work, there was always a lot of work. You had security consulting, you had vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, red teaming, and all of that stuff. You had threat modeling. All of this work, vulnerability management, was very critical stuff that used to typically happen at a point in time kind of approach, right? Now, I'm not saying that was a good thing. It obviously didn't work. Security point in time didn't work because it did not really keep pace with the development practices that you saw with the the pace of change with the applications itself. It obviously didn't lend itself to rapid release applications and so on, but it's still professionals who used to engage in these roles typically not even that long a time ago, probably even 4 or 5 years ago, would typically have all these responsibilities. These responsibilities are typically what you see even in a lot of companies today. However, things have changed quite extensively from these set of responsibilities. Right now, companies are and security teams within these companies are really overwhelmed with the amount of activity that's actually happening, right? So today you have security consulting, you have vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, typically point in time assessments that are still happening. Threat modeling is something that has been added, vulnerability management. Now you have the additional DevSecOps thing where you have to integrate into CI/CD pipelines and have additional feedback loops. You also have bug bounties that they need to handle. You have threat hunting, red teaming, cloud security, Kubernetes security. You have all of these things added to a traditional security team that is overwhelming them in terms of activity. Now, some companies have been able to offset this with the security champion model and essentially decentralizing security teams, but still, with a central security team, this is one of the biggest bottlenecks that I have seen with that security team. These teams and these companies find it really hard to keep pace because there is that much there's a deluge of activity, but then you have security teams that are not able to deal with this activity because they're from here they're going so far apart because they have so many new things to deal with. They have so many new areas to skill themselves up with, and that is something that they're not able to get to the point of doing. So what I've seen the best teams do is essentially this, right? One of the things that the best teams do, the first thing is decentralize, right? Now, decentralize can come in multiple shapes and forms. You might have a scenario where you have security champions assigned to engineering teams, and the engineering teams manage the destiny of security as well as functionality and all of that stuff related to that product or set of products that they have or they manage. This is a good way of decentralizing, and this is decentralizing makes a lot of sense because then again you're not having this central pressure that mounts on a single security team or single bunch of security people. You might still have some level of centralization that some companies do, but they are mostly viewed as consultants rather than a security team that actually does or controls the destiny of each and every product security feature that you have. This is something that we see a lot of companies moving towards, and it is definitely a encouraging sign to see that this is happening. The second thing that we see with the best teams is that they treat their engineering teams as the customers. So if you are a security role or as part of a security group function, the engineering tree, the engineering team or the engineering workforce is treated as a customer, right? Now, when I say treated as a customer, there are a lot of things that are done as part of this. One, of course, the workflows, the security workflows are closely knit with the engineering workflows, making it much more easy to work with rather than having to have, for instance, simple things like not having PDF reports, but instead having Jira tickets for security finding itself has changed the game quite a bit in the way we deal with security. In addition to that, using security defaults or using threat modeling in a more dev-centric way, or using automation in the DevOps pipeline, these are things that have really helped the best teams kind of get ahead of the security problem, or at least keep in step with the engineering challenge to make sure that these processes are harmonized with each other. And the third thing that I've seen that the best teams do is focus on security defaults. Now, the default way should be the secure way. And if that is the case, you will see that the engineering teams and the security teams don't really need to think about or don't need to sweat the small stuff, right? So if I'm able to create an ecosystem in which the default way is the secure way, either in terms of the way we use cryptographic libraries or authorization or any other type of decision or engineering decision that could have gone wrong, if it's done the default way and that in fact is the secure way, then life becomes so much easier for all parties concerned. Now, these are what the best teams do. The other thing that I want to talk about is how the aspect of skill ops can come in. Now, this obviously doesn't happen miraculously, right? This has to be worked towards. And a lot of that involves training and skill building, right? Both these things are extremely important because you obviously have a talent shortage on the one hand. You don't have obviously the absolute best set of folks who can work for you immediately and get started and give you an amazing set of results right out of the gate. And that's perhaps not, that may not be something that you want as well. You may want to use your existing workforce and build them up, give them the necessary skills, give them the necessary tools to be able to get to where you want them to get, or get to the right to the right results that is expected of them over the long run. This, I would say, is a much better way than trying to just solve problems by implementing a ton of tools and expecting that, the tools will take care of the issue. Time and time again, it's only been shown that people solve security problems and tools don't necessarily just by themselves solve these security problems. So that's where I'm going to be focusing the aspect of skill ops, or what I call skill ops. Now, skill ops, in my opinion, comes down to two or three very critical things. The first thing is continuous micro training. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. The idea here is to have small dose of content, which is essentially accompanied with a lot of hands-on skills, right? Small doses of content that is accompanied with amazing hands-on skills that can build people's capabilities quickly and give them that sense of small wins. In addition to that, we want to be able to tailor our security education in a purple team perspective. And I'm going to talk about this. The security industry has been far too focused for far too long on offensive and exploit driven education. And this is something that I find vexing, simply because while this is great, I have nothing against the offensive industry. I have nothing against people who do penetration testing, red teaming, what have you. But my issue is that when you are looking for someone to solve your problems, you are not only looking for them to solve your problems offensively, you need with them to engage with your engineering team to figure out, hey, this is the best way you do defense, or this is the defensive configuration that you need to apply to this particular cloud service, or this particular uh, Kubernetes configuration can help you get this much more secure. So the idea here is that you want to approach your security training from a purple team perspective, and I'll look into that when we get to this part of my talk. So these three things, in my opinion, can help in a significant way in solving your security challenges by giving your teams a much better approach to doing training. And let's talk about this one after the other. The first thing that I think is very, very important is the micro training, or the continuous micro training aspect. Now, the a lot of the times that when we design CBTs, right? So I hate to use that word CBTs, but that only shows you how dated and jaded that word is. So we have a lot of folks who do computer based training, or CBTs. Now, the problem with these CBTs that I've seen is that they are far too long. You have a 6 hour, 7 hour, 10 hour class is essentially broken up into a bunch of lectures with videos, and somebody is just looking at these videos, um, and they're expected to learn or do some kind of mandatory number of hours where they put in, and they're supposed to sign off on something or do a quiz at the end of something. Now, for technology security professionals or for technology professionals of any sort, this is the sort of training that just does not work simply because things keep changing so often. That is one. The second thing is that for a distributed remote workforce, you don't really have the kind of time to be able to spend 6 to 7 hours on. You need to be able to break it up into smaller. You need to be able to break it up into smaller portions. And by the time you even get through this particular one course, which is maybe a 6 hour or 7 hour course, you are really tired, and your brain is you're not really seeing any wins, right? The person who's doing that over the course of, let's say, 2 weeks, sitting at home dealing with kids and dealing with a lot of domestic responsibilities, especially because you're working from home, this is not going to scale. This is not going to work. Longer CBT style training is just not going to work. You need to change this up. What I have seen really working is much smaller training courses or modules, right? So something that can be finished anywhere between 45 minutes to 2 hours is something that I see is a model that works for security training or any kind of technology training moving forward. Because then they get to finish courses, right? So imagine that you had an access to a library of many small courses, right? Many small courses. In fact, we saw a massive uptick in engagement when we designed these small batch of small capsule courses for people around very technical topics, things like cryptography or things like Kubernetes or things like that. Instead of breaking them up into a huge topic saying Kubernetes security, break them up into Kubernetes authentication, which is a very small piece, but it's done in 45 minutes. They're done in 45 minutes because once they're done in 45 minutes, they feel like they've achieved something. And not only have they achieved something, they've actually been able to focus for that 45 minutes or an hour to get that thing done, right? That's really one of the benefits of using this sort of approach. Using a constantly peppered dose of micro training where you have multiple topics that they can access and use, that will really help because they really have the ability to get those small wins. In addition, it also becomes much more uh, effective for them simply because you're able to create content, you're able to deliver content that's much smaller in scope, smaller in size, right? And as a result, you're able to make things a lot more interactive as far as they're concerned. The second thing is that with this, if you can add the flavor of hands-on labs or cyber ranges or something like that, that would really take things to the next level simply because that would ensure that not only are they finishing their courses in 45 minutes to an hour or something like that, they can actually move on with some hands-on skills. They already have, okay, this is how I would apply Kubernetes authentication, or these are the different approaches that I do Kubernetes authentication. Break things down into consumable capsules, and people become much more effective at actually learning what they have to do, right? So for instance, what we have done, for instance, is instead of having this one huge course called Kubernetes security, we have done authentication and authorization with Kubernetes. Or versus AWS security, we focused on AWS network security, or just maybe one single module in that. So that is something that we have done, right? So as a result, what we have seen is that people are much more engaged, right? People are much more engaged. People are much more, they finish things fast. And because they finish things fast, they're enthused to learn more. Technology people love learning new things. However, they are always given this massive, when I look at a massive table of contents, that is something that I'm turned off, especially when I am doing it online, right? If I'm in class, that's fine. I want to consume as much content as possible. Unfortunately, most of us have take that particular concept. Hey, let's take a 2 day class and dump that into an online platform and just let them use that. That's not going to work. The way it works is by breaking things down into micro training models, and that becomes a lot more easy for people to scale with. The small wins get enforced quite a bit. Hands-on labs and cyber ranges are extremely important. This has become, I think, the critical piece of security training over the last few years. In fact, you will see that the envelope has been pushed quite a bit in terms of hands-on labs and cyber ranges. We are seeing that this is not only essential, but it needs to be easy to set up and run, which means that you should not have them running all these uh, clunky VMs and all of these things. It doesn't work anymore. Previously, it used to be okay when you want them to run VMs and things like that. Today, leveraging the cloud becomes really powerful, and if you are able to do that, you are able to actually roll out a much better training program because people are focused. They can just access all of this on the cloud and they're able to do it. You can pretty much do anything. We've been able to simulate offensive, defensive, anything in between training entirely on the cloud, and it works really well. And we've rolled this out in places like Black Hat and so on, which has actually been quite extensive. So hands-on labs and cyber ranges are extremely important for people to actually get that, because remember, all of these things like Kubernetes or your cloud or containers or even application security concepts or any other technical security concept is quite detailed, right? You need to understand the nitty gritties of it before you can actually say that, hey, I've actually got this, I've actually understood this. So hands-on labs become very important. The other thing that I also feel makes a big difference is adding an element of challenge, right? So what I like to do, for instance, is essentially give a challenge or issue a challenge that says, hey, you know what, implement this. There are four things wrong with this, or there are four security vulnerabilities in this code. Find it and fix it, and have some kind of a test script validate whether they've actually fixed this. Now this gets a lot of people motivated to do things. I won't use a trite term like gamification for this. I'm focused on the fact that we want to simulate real world scenarios, real world challenges, not using gamification. We want to focus on real world scenarios and set up challenges for those real world scenarios. And if they succeed in those real world scenarios, that becomes a real a value add for them, because that is something that will stay with them for a long, long time. If you want a developer to learn how they can stop making authorization bugs, or how they can stop introducing authorization bugs in their application, give them a challenge and get them working through it, and very soon you'll see that the chances of them making those security mistakes is going to be much lower, rather than having a scenario where they're just looking at videos and they're trying to implement something. Element of challenge is always something that goes a long way in enforcing better security practices. Now, all of us have heard of capture the flag. Now, capture the flag is great, but in addition to capture the flag, we should also roll out defend the flag events, or something that is defensive. You may call it defend the flag, you may call it whatever you want. The idea here is to require secure implementation of anything. So, one of the things we did recently for a company was roll out a Kubernetes security challenge. Right, it was very technical. They were looking at implementing. They are obviously a pretty big Kubernetes user, and they wanted to implement the best practices. So we laid out a large challenge that was oriented towards, hey, you know what? These are find all the big security misconfigurations, fix them, and ensure that your application is not vulnerable to something, or your infrastructure is not vulnerable to something. And this was a huge success, because most of the time we are focused on exploit, 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 which is essentially our capture the flag. But defend the flag actually gives you a real world scenario as to how you can protect something, how you can enable a certain configuration that would add a security control, or how you could leverage certain types of security implementations to be able to make even an insecure application much more secure, and so on. So this is something that I feel takes it to the next level, right? Even if you're not able to do this immediately, having a regular kind of a challenge and making this an event of sorts will also help in a big way in adding to your team's security skills. The other thing that I feel, which is a problem with a lot of security training today, is something that I brought up earlier, which is essentially that the security training industry has had an obsession with red team or exploit focused education. And again, I don't have anything against offensive or red team focused education. It's just that when you are hiring someone, right? Let's take an example of when you're hiring someone. Obviously, you're hiring a security person, or you're hiring a security engineer, or a security manager, somebody who understands security to be able to fix your security problems, or to be able to address them in a way that is constructive, not only break things, right? Yes, you might hire specifically for red team roles, but you are also, even when you are hiring for red team roles, it's important that you hire people who understand the defensive angles to it, right? Or understand the defense. A lot of people today seem to have forgotten this. And I find that to be a little painful because a lot of people love bounty hunting and love, doing penetration testing and things like that, which is great. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a lot of fun. It's extremely thrilling. But when you're looking at things like the cloud with the Kubernetes, the amount of technical depth that you need to understand from a defense perspective is not trivial. And if you are able to understand defense, there's a much better chance that you can adapt the same skills to offense. So I feel that the security industry so far has not really addressed that very meaningfully. It's still been largely offensive, largely exploit oriented. However, that has changed. In fact, I was speaking to a reviewer in Black Hat and I kind of validated it as well to a certain extent with him, where I asked, hey, you know what? Black Hat is a pretty intense training event. And of course, over the last few years, have you seen an increase in defensive classes or classes that teach you constructive security? And the answer was a resounding yes, simply because the industry seems to need it more and more. However, there is one side of the industry that's still extensively focused only on exploit and red team, which is, of course, the more glamorous side. But you must also understand that with the way we are moving, especially cloud native, Kubernetes, containers, modern application security, it's very important to understand defense. Otherwise, you kind of get lost in the entire piece, right? That is something that I've seen with a lot of these scenarios. So cloud native technologies definitely require a greater level of understanding defensive configurations and parameters. This is something that I've seen a lot because a lot of people may understand the red team or the offensive angles to something, but when you ask them to actually implement something on an AWS or an Azure or a GCP or a Kubernetes environment, that's where they kind of draw blanks, right? And since there is more code involved in a lot of these, a lot of people are not equipped to deal with this. So that is also something that you need to understand. So what I feel with security education is to apply both offensive and defensive angles to any kind of security education that you're rolling out, right? Technical security training is good when you're able to demonstrate both these things. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, right? So recently we were working with an engineering team that was rolling out a product on the cloud. And they had a vulnerability that was a server-side request forgery flaw that we were able to find as part of an offensive engagement. And we were able to compromise that and steal credentials from their cloud provider and then start doing lateral movement against their cloud service. Now, this was great and we demonstrated this and it was great, but if we had stopped there, that would not make a lot of sense. However, when we demonstrated the same attack with a much more secure configuration from the cloud provider and things like that, and added a bunch of network security parameters and a bunch of different security monitoring parameters, that's when the concept was really driven home, right? They really understood, oh my God, you were able to do something like this offensively, but doing these three things, which is something that is not that complicated for us, we were able to actually achieve much better security outcomes because of this knowledge. So having a kind of orientation towards a combination of both offensive and defensive security education makes it a whole lot more effective for technology teams or security teams to understand how they can do things better. Now, this kind of leads me to the point of secure defaults, right? Now, this is again kind of very close to what I was talking about with secure defaults. If the default way is the secure way, then it becomes much easier to enforce this sort of training as well. So let's say you have a scenario where your developer teams, let's say you have implemented secure defaults for certain things. So let us say you have to use secure crypto libraries like Google Tink or Libsodium or something like that. Now, you can demonstrate very simply that using this would make you more secure, and not using this would make you less secure. And it's very easy to demonstrate that with secure defaults, making it much more effective for you to train, not only from the dev angle, from the DevOps angle, from the infrastructure as code, from any angle. Technology security training can be made much better if you're able to demonstrate both these concepts effectively. This brings me to the conclusion segment of my talk. Before I get to the conclusion segment of my talk, this is something that I want to leave you with. I want to bring up some very useful existing resources that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about in terms of hands-on training. At the same time, the combination of red team and blue team, which is essentially a purple team training, that can give you some idea of how you can build this kind of practice as part of your own teams. The first one, with all disclosure, is my own project, which is AppSec Engineer. We do a lot of AppSec, cloud security, Kubernetes, threat modeling, and a lot of these micro training. All of the ideas from this talk have been implemented in that project. And of course, we do have a free variant as well as a paid variant. You can check that out if you'd like. But in addition to that, you also have a lot of other offerings like Web Security Academy from Portswigger, highly respected, from the creators of Burp Suite. This is a very interesting project to check out. They have a lot of different examples around different application security flaws. They don't necessarily cover anything beyond application security, but they're really deep in the application security space. You also have Hack the Box, which is a very popular project, which has a bunch of vulnerable machines that have different set of vulnerabilities. Some of them are community created, which also gives you a very interesting perspective of the new vulnerabilities out there, the new kind of exploits that are happening, as well as, of course, Try Hack Me, which I've also seen as a very interesting project recently, where you can also build out a lot of labs, use a lot of labs from the community, and start to get a hands-on perspective of security training, especially for cybersecurity, application security, and so on. So these are some of the useful resources that you can look at. And of course, there are many others, but I decided to call out these because these are the ones that I'm most impressed by personally. So these are some of the resources that you can use for your own self or for your own team as well. Where I'm essentially going to just summarize a few key points from this talk. First of all, training is essential when you want to build a successful security or even a technology team. And training needs to be something that's engaging. It needs to be something inclusive that works in a remote, friendly, or even a hybrid workplace. This has to be something that teams have to look out for in 2021 and beyond. This is something that I think will only increase in need over time. Better training experience is something that will only increase the need over time. Micro training is something that I'm a big believer of, simply because you want small wins, your team wants small wins. You also want, remember, these people are engaged constantly with different aspects of work. And micro training gives them the ability to focus on something for a short period of time and get it done. Again, that makes it a lot easier. It also becomes much easier to roll out better training in a micro training format than it is in a large scope CBT style training. That is something that I strongly believe in. Hands-on labs and cyber ranges are extremely essential, simply because you need complicated technology concepts to be demonstrated, and people need to work through these concepts with hands-on labs, and that makes a lot more a difference because they are able to understand it much more in depth rather than having it just as a simple video. It's not very easy to understand complicated technology concepts with video. And finally, offensive and defensive security are both essential when you're training a technology and security team, simply because when they understand both sides of the same coin, that's when they're able to make things that's when they're able to connect things a whole lot better and actually implement it over time. Now, an over focus on offensive does not have much value to people who are largely in defensive roles. And most security trainings are still very offensive in their orientation. Having realistic offensive and subsequent defensive scenarios makes it a whole lot more effective for people to understand and actually implement at the workplace over time. This brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you very much. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to the rest of the conference. Thanks a lot.